The human janitor shared his coat with a shivering predator cub. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed the maintenance cart down the gleaming corridors of Nexus Station. The massive space station orbited the neutral zone between three galactic territories, serving as a diplomatic hub where dozens of alien species conducted their business. As the night shift janitor, Marcus knew every inch of these halls better than most of the diplomats who walked them during the day. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough for a human trying to make his way in a galaxy that still viewed his species with suspicion. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, barely 50 years since first contact. Most aliens saw them as either too aggressive or too soft, depending on their own nature. Marcus had learned to keep his head down and do his job. Tonight felt different, though. The station hummed with tension that had nothing to do with the usual political negotiations. Earlier that day, a Catharan delegation had arrived. The Catharans were apex predators from a harsh world where only the strongest survived. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in sleek black fur with razor-sharp claws and teeth that could tear through steel. Their yellow eyes missed nothing, and their pack mentality made them formidable allies or terrifying enemies. Marcus had seen them in the corridors during his rounds, their powerful forms moving with deadly grace. The other species gave them wide berths, and even the security forces seemed nervous. The Catharans were here to negotiate mining rights in a contested system, and tensions were high. As Marcus rounded the corner near the diplomatic quarters, he heard something that made him pause. A soft whimpering sound echoed from one of the side passages. He stopped his cart and listened carefully. The sound came again, barely audible, but unmistakably distressed. Following the noise, Marcus found himself in a maintenance alcove that was rarely used. There, huddled behind a large air recycling unit, was a small figure that made his heart skip a beat. It was a Catharan cub, no bigger than a human child, its black fur matted and trembling. The little creature's yellow eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion. Marcus knew enough about Catharan biology to understand what he was seeing. The cub was suffering from temperature shock. While adult Catharans were incredibly hardy, their young were vulnerable to temperature extremes. The station's climate control was set for optimal comfort across multiple species, but it was apparently too cold for this little one. The cub looked up at Marcus with those frightened golden eyes, and something in the human's chest tightened. He could see the creature shivering uncontrollably, its small body curled into a tight ball in a futile attempt to conserve warmth. Without thinking, Marcus began to remove his maintenance jacket. The cub growled weakly, a sound that would have been terrifying from an adult, but was merely pitiful from this small creature. Marcus moved slowly, speaking in soft tones as he approached. "Hey there, little one. You're cold, aren't you?" He knew the cub probably couldn't understand his words, but his tone seemed to have some effect. The growling stopped, replaced by confused chittering sounds. Marcus carefully wrapped his jacket around the small form, making sure not to make any sudden movements that might frighten the already traumatized youngster. The effect was immediate. The cub's shivering began to subside as it nestled into the warm fabric. Marcus sat down nearby, keeping his distance but staying close enough to monitor the situation. He pulled out his communication device, wondering if he should report this to security or try to find the cub's parents himself. Before he could decide, the cub made the choice for him. With a small chirping sound, it crawled closer to Marcus, still wrapped in his jacket. The little creature seemed to be drawn to his body heat, pressing against his leg with complete trust that surprised them both. Marcus found himself gently stroking the cub's soft fur, amazed at how different it felt from what he had expected. The Catharan adults always seemed so intimidating with their battle-scarred hides and aggressive postures, but this little one felt like any scared child might. soft and warm and desperately in need of comfort. Time seemed to slow as Marcus sat there in the maintenance alcove, this unlikely pair finding solace in each other's presence. The cub's breathing gradually became deeper and more regular, and Marcus realized the little one had fallen asleep against him. He didn't dare move, afraid of waking the exhausted creature. As he sat there, Marcus began to notice things about the cub that he had missed before. There were small scratches on its fur, suggesting it had been hiding for some time. Its body was thin, indicating it hadn't eaten recently. Most concerning of all, there was no sign of any adult Catharans looking for a missing cub. The implications began to sink in. This wasn't just a lost child who had wandered away from its parents. Something had happened to separate this cub from its pack, and in Catharan society, that usually meant something terrible. Cubs were fiercely protected by their entire family group. For one to be alone like this suggested either abandonment or tragedy. Marcus's training as a maintenance worker had taught him to notice details that others might miss. He began to piece together what might have happened. There had been some kind of incident earlier in the day, something that the station administration had kept quiet. He had noticed increased security patrols and hushed conversations among the staff. Now, holding this trembling cub, Marcus realized he might be witnessing the aftermath of something much larger than a simple diplomatic mission. The Catharan delegation might not just be here for mining rights. They might be refugees or survivors of some conflict that had cost them dearly. The cub stirred in his arms, making soft mewing sounds that tugged at Marcus's heart. He looked down at the small face, peaceful now in sleep, and felt something shift inside him. Whatever was happening here, whatever had brought this little one to hide alone in the dark corridors of the station, he couldn't just walk away. Marcus had always prided himself on being practical, on knowing his place in the galaxy's hierarchy. Humans were still proving themselves, still earning their spot among the stars. Getting involved in alien politics or family dramas was exactly the kind of thing that could ruin his career and possibly his life. But as he looked at the sleeping cub, all of those concerns seemed small and distant. This wasn't about politics or species relations or career advancement. This was about a scared, cold child who needed help. And if there was one thing humans had always been good at, it was protecting the vulnerable, regardless of what species they belonged to. The decision made itself. Marcus carefully adjusted his position, making sure the cub remained comfortable while he figured out his next move. He wouldn't abandon this little one to face whatever dangers had separated it from its family. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As the station's artificial night cycle continued around them, Marcus held the sleeping Catharan cub close, both of them finding an unexpected sense of peace in this moment of connection across species lines. Neither of them knew that this simple act of kindness would set in motion events that would change not just their own lives, but the entire balance of power in this part of the galaxy. The human janitor and the predator cub, brought together by chance and held together by compassion, rested in the quiet alcove while the station continued its endless rotation through the stars. Tomorrow would bring challenges neither of them could imagine, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough. The human janitor shared his coat. Continued. Marcus woke to the sound of approaching footsteps echoing through the station corridors. He had dozed off sometime during the early morning hours, still cradling the Catharan cub against his chest. The little creature remained fast asleep, its breathing steady and peaceful for the first time since he had found it. The footsteps were getting closer, and Marcus could hear the distinctive clicking of claws on the metal deck plating. Catharans. Multiple ones by the sound of it. His heart began to race as he realized this could go very badly for him. Finding a human alone with a Catharan cub might be misinterpreted as kidnapping or worse. The cub stirred at the sound of the approaching pack, its ears twitching. Slowly, the golden eyes opened and focused on Marcus's face. Instead of fear, there was recognition and something that might have been gratitude. The little creature made a soft, chirping sound and nuzzled closer to the warmth of Marcus's chest. The footsteps stopped just outside the alcove. Marcus could hear low growling and what sounded like urgent conversation in the Catharan language. He recognized some of the tonal patterns from his basic xenolinguistics training, but couldn't make out specific words. "Kesitarne," came a deep voice from just around the corner. Marcus knew that phrase. It was a Catharan greeting, but also could mean show yourself, depending on the context. Taking a deep breath, Marcus carefully stood up, still holding the sleeping cub. He stepped out of the alcove and found himself facing 4 adult Kitharans. Their massive forms filled the corridor, yellow eyes glowing in the dim lighting. Each one was over 7 feet tall, their muscular bodies tensed for action. The largest Kitharan, clearly the pack leader, stepped forward. His fur was silver-streaked with age, and multiple scars crossed his arms and chest. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder, but the words were in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Human, you have our lost one." Marcus nodded slowly, fighting every instinct that told him to run. "I found him hiding in the maintenance area. He was cold and scared. I was trying to keep him warm until I could find his family." The pack leader's eyes narrowed, studying Marcus intently. The other Kitharans flanked him, their claws partially extended. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. "Why?" the leader asked. "Why would human help Kitharan young?" It was such a simple question, but Marcus realized it carried enormous weight. He could sense that his answer would determine not just his own fate, but possibly much more. He looked down at the cub in his arms, then back at the imposing figures before him. "Because he needed help," Marcus said simply. "Because he was cold and alone and frightened. That's all that mattered." The pack leader tilted his head. A gesture Marcus had learned indicated deep thought among Kitharans. The other adults exchanged glances, their postures shifting slightly. The aggression seemed to ease, replaced by something Marcus couldn't quite identify. "You speak truth words," the leader said finally. "We smell no deception, no fear scent on the young one." The cub chose that moment to wake up fully, chirping loudly when it saw the adult Kitharans. Instead of immediately reaching for them, however, it looked back at Marcus and made a series of soft sounds that were clearly communicative. The pack leader's expression changed dramatically. His ears perked forward, and his eyes widened slightly. He exchanged rapid words with his companions in their native language, the conversation growing increasingly animated. "The young one, he speaks of warmth giving, of protection offering." The leader's voice had taken on a tone of wonder. "He says the human Marcus gave coat warmth when pack could not be found." Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," said another Kitharan, stepping forward. This one was smaller, with more delicate features that Marcus realized might indicate a female. "Not anyone. Many fear the Kitharan young. Many think we train for killing from birth moment." The leader nodded gravely. "We are between homes now. Our world territory was taken by hegemony forces 3 cycles ago. We come here seeking new place for pack to live." The pieces began to fall into place for Marcus. The Kitharans weren't here for mining rights at all. They were refugees, displaced from their homeworld and looking for sanctuary. The cub had probably gotten separated during the chaos of evacuation and arrival at the station. "In our culture," the leader continued, "when stranger shows kindness to pack young without expectation of reward, it creates bond debt. You have given freely of your warmth and protection. The pack owes life debt to Marcus Human." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Life debts were serious business among predator species. They created obligations that could last for generations. "I don't need any debt," he said quickly. I was just helping a scared kid. The female Catharin made a sound that might have been laughter. Human Marcus speaks like pack member. Children are protected by all, yes? This is good thinking. As if summoned by some invisible signal, more Kitharans began to appear in the corridor. They moved with the fluid grace of natural hunters, but their postures were relaxed, curious rather than threatening. Marcus realized that word of what had happened was spreading through their community. The cub in his arms began to chirp excitedly, reaching toward the newcomers but still maintaining contact with Marcus. It was as if the little one wanted to share its discovery with the rest of the pack. An elderly Catharin approached, her fur almost completely silver. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority. I am Kesara, eldest of this pack group. The young one Zektar has told us much about the human who shared warmth. Marcus looked down at the cub, finally learning its name. Zektar, huh? That's a good, strong name. The fact that he knew this detail about their naming conventions seemed to impress the gathered Catharans. Murmurs of approval rippled through the group. You know our ways, Kesara observed. This is unusual for humankind. I try to learn about the people I work around, Marcus replied. Seems only polite. This simple statement caused another stir among the Kitharans. Their concept of politeness was tied directly to respect and honor, Marcus remembered. By taking the time to learn their customs, he had unknowingly shown them profound respect. We would speak more with Marcus Human, the pack leader announced. There is much to discuss about bond debt and future paths. Before Marcus could respond, his communication device chimed with an urgent message. Station security was looking for him. His shift had ended hours ago, and his supervisor was wondering why he hadn't checked in. I have to get to work, Marcus said apologetically, gently handing Zektar to the pack leader. The cub protested with small mewing sounds, reaching back toward Marcus. The young one does not wish to separate, Kesara observed with what Marcus was learning to recognize as Catharin amusement. This is also unusual. Catharin young typically bond only with pack family. Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. He had grown attached to the little cub in their few hours together, and saying goodbye was harder than he had expected. Perhaps, the pack leader said slowly, there is more to discuss than simple bond debt. Perhaps the ancestors guide us to new understanding. As Marcus gathered his maintenance cart and prepared to continue his duties, he couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had just occurred. The way the Kitharans looked at him had changed completely from when they first arrived. There was respect there now, and something else he couldn't quite name. Walking away from the group, Marcus could hear Zektar's protesting calls echoing down the corridor. The sound tugged at his heart, but he had responsibilities to fulfill. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would soon involve the highest levels of station administration and fundamentally alter the relationship between humans and one of the galaxy's most feared predator species. And the human janitor shared his coat. Conclusion. Marcus finished his maintenance rounds 3 hours later than usual, his mind constantly drifting back to the small Kitharin cub and the intense encounter with the pack. As he made his way back to his modest quarters in the civilian section of the station, he noticed something unusual. The corridors were quieter than normal, with fewer aliens moving about their business. Those he did encounter seemed to watch him with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been respect. Word traveled fast on Nexus Station, and apparently word about the human janitor and the Catharin cub was spreading. When Marcus finally reached his quarters, he stopped short at what he found outside his door. There, arranged in a neat semicircle, were 7 Kitharin cubs of various ages. They ranged from tiny ones barely larger than Zekatar to adolescents nearly half the size of adults. All of them were fast asleep, curled up on bedding that had clearly been brought from elsewhere on the station. Standing guard over the sleeping youngsters was the female Kitharin he had met earlier. She rose gracefully as he approached, inclining her head in what he recognized as a gesture of respect. "Human Marcus returns," she said softly, careful not to wake the cubs. "I am Veltar, clutch mother to these young ones." "They wish to sleep near the warm giver." Marcus stared at the scene before him in amazement. "They all came here? But why?" Zektar spoke to his clutchmates about the human who shared warmth without being asked. Cubs understand kindness, perhaps better than adults sometimes do. They wished to be near one who protects young ones. As if responding to their conversation, several of the cubs stirred and opened sleepy eyes. When they saw Marcus, they began making soft, contented sounds that reminded him of purring cats. One of the larger cubs stood up and padded over to him, gently butting its head against his leg in an unmistakable gesture of affection. "This is unprecedented," Veltar continued, watching the interaction with fascination. "Kitharin young do not typically approach outsiders. They are taught from earliest age to be wary of other species. But Zektar has convinced them that humans are different." Marcus knelt down to pet the cub that had approached him, marveling at how soft its fur was. "I just did what anyone should do. There's nothing special about it." "Ah, but there is," came a familiar voice from down the corridor. The pack leader approached, accompanied by Kesara and several other adult Kitharans. "That is exactly what makes it special. You see no reason to boast of kindness. You expect no reward for compassion." The elderly female nodded approvingly. "We have spent this day learning about human Marcus. Your work supervisors speak well of you. Your fellow workers say you are one who helps without being asked." Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. "They've been investigating me?" "Not investigating," the pack leader clarified. "Honoring. When life debt is created, we must understand the one to whom we owe it. What we have learned has only increased our respect." Kesara stepped forward, her ancient eyes bright with something Marcus couldn't identify. 3 cycles ago, when the hegemony forces attacked our world, many species had opportunity to assist. Most chose neutrality. Some chose to profit from our displacement. None chose sacrifice. "But humans," Veltar added, "humans sent aid ships, medical supplies, food for the cubs. They asked for nothing in return and expected no gratitude." Marcus felt his worldview shifting slightly. He had heard about the refugee crisis in the outer systems, but hadn't realized the scope of human involvement. "That's just what we do," he said quietly. "We help when we can." "Yes," the pack leader rumbled with satisfaction. "That is what we have learned. Humans help when they can. This is why the cubs sleep at your door. This is why the pack has decided." "Decided what?" Kesara exchanged glances with the other adults before speaking. "We invoke ancient rites of bond pack adoption. You have shown care for Kitharin young. You have proven worthiness through action, not words. If you accept, you become pack family. Cubs under your protection, pack at your call." Marcus felt the weight of the offer settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just honor being offered. It was responsibility on a scale he had never imagined. To be considered family by a Kitharin pack meant obligations that could span a lifetime. Looking down at the cubs arranged around his doorway, seeing their trusting faces and peaceful expressions, Marcus realized his answer had been decided the moment he found Zektar shivering in that maintenance alcove. "I accept," he said simply. The reaction was immediate. The adult Kitharans began making deep rumbling sounds that Marcus recognized as expressions of approval and pleasure. The cubs, sensing the change in mood, became more animated, chirping and playing around his feet. Then it is done, Kesara proclaimed. By ancient law and modern need, Marcus of the Humans is now Marcus Pack brother of the Kitharan refugees of Nexus Station. What followed was unlike anything in Marcus's experience. The corridor outside his quarters became an impromptu celebration as more Kitharans arrived. Food was shared, stories were told, and Marcus found himself at the center of a complex ritual that bound him not just to this pack, but to Kitharan society as a whole. As the station's artificial dawn began to brighten the corridors, Marcus sat surrounded by sleeping cubs, their small bodies warm against his legs and sides. The adult Kitharans had finally dispersed to their own quarters, but the youngsters had refused to leave their new pack brother. Veltar remained as well, keeping watch over her charges. "You understand what this means," she said softly. "These cubs will grow remembering human kindness. They will teach their own young about the species that shares warmth without being asked." Marcus nodded, gently stroking Zektar's fur as the little cub slept pressed against his side. "And when they're older?" "When they are older, they will be warriors and leaders and hunters who know that humans are to be trusted, protected, and honored. They will remember that when one human found a cold cub, he did not calculate profit or risk. He simply shared his coat." The implications of this moment began to sink in for Marcus. Kitharan society was based on family bonds that lasted for generations. These cubs would carry this memory forward, and their children would know humans as friend pack rather than strangers or potential threats. "You have changed the path of two species tonight," Veltar continued. "When these cubs take their places in Kitharan society, they will advocate for human interests. When conflicts arise, they will remember the warmth of human compassion." Marcus looked around at the peaceful scene, cubs sleeping trustingly around him, and felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had started his shift as a simple maintenance worker trying to keep his head down and do his job. He was ending it as a bridge between species, a living symbol of what was possible when beings chose kindness over fear. A soft chirping sound drew his attention to Zektar, who had opened his golden eyes and was looking up at Marcus with unmistakable affection. The little cub reached up with one paw, gently touching Marcus's face, then settled back down to sleep. In that simple gesture, Marcus saw the future. Not just his own future, but the future of human-Kitharan relations. These cubs would grow up knowing that humans were capable of love and sacrifice without expectation of reward. They would remember that when they were cold and afraid, a human had shared his warmth. As Nexus Station continued its endless rotation through space, Marcus closed his eyes and allowed himself to rest among his new family. Tomorrow would bring challenges and changes he couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, surrounded by the soft sounds of sleeping cubs and the presence of a species that had welcomed him as pack brother, he had everything he needed. The human janitor who had shared his coat with a shivering predator cub had become something far more important. Proof that compassion could transcend species, that kindness could build bridges across the vast distances between worlds, and that sometimes the most profound changes in the galaxy began with the simplest acts of human decency.